Get right into today's session. Our speaker today is Jim Thomas. Jim Thomas is the researcher director with the ETC group, which works to address the socioeconomic and ecological issues surrounding new technologies that could have an impact on the world's poorest and most vulnerable people. For over 25 years, Jim has been tracking and investigating the impacts of synthetic biology, geoengineering, genetic engineering, nanotechnology, big data, and other emerging technology platforms as they affect human rights, biodiversity, equity, and food systems. In addition to authoring ETC group reports on these topics, Jim has been an observer in related UN processes, convened international civil society collaborations, appeared in several documentaries and published stories in The Guardian, New Internationalist, Huffington Post, Slate, and The Economist. Over the years, Jim has been invited to present ETC's group research to princes, peasants, policymakers, poets, protesters, and private equity investors alike. Jim, please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Julia. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Great, that's wonderful. And yeah, it's so nice to be on a call with members of the NFU. I'm a very big fan. I was last at an NFU conference in London, Ontario, but I think that was a few years ago, so I miss being around these great people. So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk. I'm based, as I put in the chat, in Nelson, BC, which is Sinexton Tunaha territory. As you can probably hear from my voice, I'm not from here. I'm originally from the UK. I'm also not a farmer. So as I talk about this issue, I'll be talking about it really from the perspective of etc. Group's research. We try and understand the implications of changes in the food system, corporate concentration, new technologies. So moving more to the sort of the larger pictures, and I look forward to hearing from people on this call where they think this fits into their own work and farming practice. Let me try and share my screen here. Let's see if this works. Great. So I just wanted to start actually by referencing something that at etc. Group we actually are going to be putting out in about a month's time or a few weeks' time, which was a story that we wrote last year. And this was a story about Jack and the Beanstalk, that some of you may know, but we're calling it Jack and the Cloud Giant. And I'm not going to tell the whole story, that would take up too much time. But it's a story in which Jack, a simple farm boy, goes to market, sells the cow, as you know the story, I'm sure, and is convinced by a corporate salesman to buy a digital platform, a digital agriculture app. And he goes home with his digital agriculture app, much to the annoyance of his mother. And the next day he finds that there's this data vine growing between his farm and the clouds above, promising all sorts of insights into how he can run his farm and improve his farm. And he wonders what's up that data vine, and he decides to climb up it to sort of understand the golden promises at the top of the data vine. And when he goes up, he sees very quickly that it's not just the data vine coming off of his farm, it's coming off of many other farms, in fact, all to the single cloud. And you know that the original story, once he gets to the cloud, he finds there's a data giant up there who looks remarkably like Jeff Bezos from Amazon, who is aggregating together all the data and giving him a sort of field view of the entire food system so that he can buy and sell land and buy and sell commodities and basically begin to reshape the food system. And all sorts of things happen up there with Jack. There's a sort of AI bird that he comes across and so forth. And eventually he's disgusted by the whole thing and he climbs down the data vine and cuts it off. And the reason I'm telling you this is one thing I'm going to hope to try and do in this presentation is not stay on the farm so much, but like Jack, try and climb up to the cloud, try and climb up to where the data's going and try and get the bigger picture. And I say that because the discussions about digital agriculture, precision agriculture, data-driven farming are usually by the companies that push it very much focused on the farm. The images that we see of digital agriculture are like this one. It's a man on a farm with a laptop Sometimes he's walking through fields. Very, very rarely you'll see a woman, but there's a picture here of a woman in a cab farming with her um, her data platform there in the cab. And these are sort of the images are always very much on the farm scale. And the promise that's made to farmers is that through these new digital tools, which we're going to talk about in a moment, um, farmers are able to realize greater efficiencies, understand their own land and soil and weather and so forth in ways that will give them a greater return on their operations. And the focus is very tight in. It's on what this can do to the farmer right now in the next quarter or season. Um, Probably it would be interesting to know who on this call maybe uses some of these digital agriculture tools. But given the sort of membership of the NFU, I'm going to focus mostly on row crops. And they're really um, the big standout example of digital agriculture is these data platforms where you can sign up to a service such as Climate Field View by Bayer, and it takes not only the data from your tractor or from your operations, your farm data, but combines that with data from the region. It combines it with soil data, weather data, in order to give you these layers of information about your farm. So originally the field view system, the climate field view system, which I'm going to talk more about, was developed by the Climate Corporation, a small startup from Silicon Valley, who were in 2013 bought by Monsanto for almost $1 billion. And at the time, it shocked a lot of people that Monsanto had paid $1 billion for this small startup that was had lots of weather information. It didn't seem to make sense. And you saw these things, Rob Fraley from Monsanto saying, in fact, we could in the next 5 or 10 years become an information technology company. It was seen as a turning point for Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer. And indeed, it's true that the companies such as Monsanto, now Bayer, or DuPont and Syngenta, were switching their business model to this digital business model, where providing data and receiving data and then using data as the center of their business model was where they were headed to. So the climate field view system is probably the most popular of these. It looks like something like about 50% or just over 50% of farmers who use these digital tools use climate field view. And it claims to be on 60 million hectares in 23 countries. Importantly, they have 70 partners, and I'm going to come back to what that means. But in the same way that Facebook is a environment where you have lots of apps in it, or the App Store for this thing. So Climate Field View sees itself as a platform. They have all sorts of services they offer, not just providing information about the state of your soils, of your crop. Here's an example, Bayer's Field Catcher. This is a service where you can take pictures in your field, either of what look to be diseases on crops, or weeds that are coming through. And then it goes up to the cloud. It searches against about 100,000 different photos that Bayer have, and it identifies for you what that is, and then suggests to you which herbicides you should use and which Bayer products, of course, you should use. Behind this is artificial intelligence, and a lot of what's going on in this field is applying artificial intelligence, that is to say, strong algorithms, um, in the cloud, the data cloud, to your data, and then coming back with suggestions. It's what the companies call prescriptions. So by taking all your data and analyzing it through AI, they can give you specific prescriptions on how you should farm, what products you should use, when you should farm. Monsanto, when they bought Climate Corporation, said they think there's about 40 key decisions that a farmer makes over a season. And they want to be able to send data for you to influence those 40 key decisions throughout the year. Climate Field View, which is Bayer, is just one of these. These are some of the other data platforms that are out there. And it's worth noting that most of these are by very large names that you're familiar with. So Xavio is BASF. Granular and Encirca, that's Corteva, which is Dow DuPont. AtFarm, that's Yara. Nutrien Ag Solutions, of course, is Nutrien, the fertilizer giant. John Deere Operations Center, that's John Deere. That's probably about the second most popular of the digital platforms. And there are others too. I think this quote on the side here, which is from somebody from Farmobile, is very, very apt. What these companies are doing at the moment, they're in a grab. They're trying to get as much data as they can. Farm data, whether that's on seed, soil, input, spraying, fertilizer application, weather, and they're grabbing as much as they can to put into their AI systems in order to then aggregate it and use it. It's a giant land grab, and that's really the time we're in right now. Sorry, hang on. Of course, it's not just in row crops. I think it's worth mentioning that this data-driven approach to farming, where you take large amounts of data and use it to track what's going on in the farming systems, going on in every part of farming. So here's some examples from livestock farming. There's systems on the left there. There's systems in China now in large pig production units with facial recognition that are tracking the health and statistics of pigs in there. You can see that down the bottom right. There's a lot around cattle and tracking cattle, tracking their health, tracking where they're moving around. This idea of what's called the Internet of Cows that's now rolling out, where every cow basically has the equivalent of an email address, and the farmer can get data on every single cow and be tracking them as a herd and so forth. The chickens in the middle, that's a picture from a farm in China. It's a blockchain chicken farm. Every chicken is tracked. It knows what it's eaten, where it's been, how much it's exercised, what its health statistics are, and all of that then goes right through the food chain to make food safety claims later on. So this sort of rich data. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving here. And it's not just the tracking. It's not just the vision of digital agriculture is not just tracking data, large amounts of data coming off the farm. It's also about automation. So we're seeing an increase in use of drones, for example. I think it's now true, or it's soon to be true, that agriculture is going to be the second largest use of drones, not only for scouting the farm and getting the visuals, but also for spraying as well, and for application of fertilizer, or not so much fertilizer, of pesticides and so forth. And we're seeing a massive uptick in development of robots on the farm. You'll see some of it in that picture there, particularly this idea of mini robots, swarms of mini robots that can move out and either be weeding or dealing with pests and so forth. The picture I'd actually draw your attention to is the one in the middle, which doesn't look so impressive as the others. But this is a system by Blue River Technologies, which is owned by John Deere. And underneath that hood that you see there being pulled by the tractor, you have a very sophisticated robotic system that is imaging every single plant on that field, and then identifying it, whether it's a weed or not, and then either spraying it or not spraying it with kind of an inkjet sprayer. So this is the vision of very precise spraying on the land, all based on the data that's coming in as it drives over the field there. One thing that John Deere and Bayer and others hope to get to is every square centimeter of the farm have data come off of it. And we've got systems now being trialed where every single corn plant has hundreds of thousands or even millions of data points coming off of it. This tremendous amount of data that's supposed to give you precise information to make precise decisions, which will be made by AI algorithms run by these corporations. And of course, robotics isn't just in row crops. In fact, I'd say robotics is really developing much faster in soft fruit, in vegetables, in nurseries. That's really where use of robotic systems, because there's so much more value often in those farming systems, is really moving fastest. For example, in picking berries. And again, artificial intelligence is extremely important here. It's difficult to pick a berry. It's a hard thing to do. And so it takes a lot of computation to recognize it, to recognize if it's ripe, to pick it exactly in a way that you don't squash it. So artificial intelligence is extremely important here in the connection with the cloud. And so the vision of digital farming is that these things all come together. You've got the farmer there with their platform, you have the smart machinery or the drones out there scanning, getting the information, the analytics, and then the robots and increase automation doing the farming. It becomes these smart farming systems. And ag tech investors will talk about the Internet of Farming Things as being this great opportunity. I put here as a 14 billion market by 2026, according to one analyst. And I think it's worth just flagging that this isn't disconnected from some of the other strategies that the large agribusiness firms have been following for a while, particularly around biotech. Um, that notion of precision, of having lots of data about your farm and then applying exactly the right thing in a tailored way, also fits with some of the new developments in genetic engineering. So we're seeing a lot of investment by companies such as Bayer, for example, in microbials, genetically engineering microbes to go into the soil. Once they have lots of information about your soil, they'll tell you what prescription for the soil the microbes should be for your specific soil. They have an agreement with Join Bio, for example, that's working on that for reducing nitrogen use. The idea of spraying what are called RNAi, these gene silencing pesticides, where they will design little strands of RNA, like DNA, which can be sprayed over your field. And the more information they have about your field, they could claim to tailor that directly to your specific situation. And of course, gene editing, CRISPR and so forth. I had a conversation with an executive of what was just becoming Corteva at the time, where they said they're interested in gene editing was as data came through about a particular disease or rust coming through a particular area, they could more quickly change the seeds to fit that. So there is a connection here between the vast databases that these companies already have for breeding and for genomics, and that they want to be able to use the field data to create uh, uh, tailored seeds, tailored sprays, tailored microbes as well. I hope this all makes sense. So that's the vision. What are the questions? What does it begin? Where does this begin to raise concerns for farmers? This highly automated, high tech, data driven vision. One of the earliest rumblings that we heard as we began to look through this coming from farmers was around what's called the right to repair movement. And I think this may be familiar to people on this call, that if you have a John Deere tractor or CNH tractor and others, increasingly the data has been coming off of that for a while. They've had GPS connections for a while, and John Deere forbids you to do the repairs because of the effect. They want to be the ones that have the data coming off of that, and they want to control the data coming off of that. And that in fact there's all kinds of agreements that you make when you buy one of these tractors with data streaming off of them. Excuse me. Sometimes those agreements, they're a bit like the click agreements that you have on the internet, but you get them as soon as you turn the key. That just by turning the key, you've agreed to a whole set of conditions about your data and who takes it and what it's used for. And within that, agree that you don't do repairs on your own tractor, that this has to go to John Deere. And obviously that raises many concerns for farmers about losing control over these extremely expensive pieces of kit that they've just paid for, and yet John Deere still kind of owns and controls. And so the right to repair movement is sort of one of the first movements that's come up that's begun to push back against the power of large digital agribusiness in farmers' lives and businesses. And then last year we saw another interesting example. Bayer FieldView, the platform that I showed you earlier, has, they said, these many apps. And one of the apps, one of the agreements they'd entered into was with a company called Tillable. Tillable call themselves the Airbnb of farmland. That they basically are building up a database of farmland, and they then want to be able to rent out farmland online and make agreements with farm landowners online. And it looked like very quickly, like Bayer's data coming off of the FieldView system, where was being looked at by Tillable, and that Tillable were then going to landowners and making offers on land that was rented by those farmers that were higher than the farmers were paying, and looked like they had all the information about what the farm, the productivity of the farm, and therefore its profitability, and were then using that to make offers and push up the price of the land. Bayer and Tillable claimed that they hadn't been using individual data, that they hadn't done that. It was entirely coincidental that Tillable had written to all these landowners to try and grab the land, where the tenants had been using their system. But in a way, it doesn't matter if they have the individual data. I think one of the important things to understand about big data in any system is, of course, there's the specific data of your farm data, what you have and what it tells you about you specifically. And Bayer claim that they don't give away your personal farm data, but then they aggregate it, they put it together, and then they process it through artificial intelligence and algorithms, and then they give away the insights. They don't give it away, they sell it. And the aggregated data is just as valuable as the specific data. It's quite possible that Tillable could have had access to the aggregated data and used that to work out what the value of different pieces of land were. And this kind of goes to what's going to be one of the bigger issues with digital agriculture. There'll be a lot of discussion about your data and who controls your data and how your data is being used. But once it gets aggregated, it's not your data anymore. Then, particularly once it's been analyzed by artificial intelligence and algorithms, it becomes Bayer's data, and they get to sell it. And the insights that they get out of it, they will use maybe against individual farmers. As I say, Climate FieldView sees itself as a platform, and it has these 70 different agreements so far with different companies. So some of those are drone companies who are providing drone data. Some of those are companies like John Deere. If you're using a John Deere tractor, you can connect that to your Climate FieldView profile, weather data, and so forth. And I think the big question, as the Tillable example gives, is what do they share with them? What data do those companies get? Not about you individually. They'll get some about you individually if you agree to it. But what are they getting in the aggregate? And who else are they selling those insights to? Climate FieldView claims that it's processing that data, creating those insights, selling them as prescriptions to the farmer, or giving them as prescriptions to the farmer. But in fact, it's almost free. The Climate FieldView system is something like $150 a year, but the first year is free. Basically, it's free. And anything that's a free ride is not a free lunch. Of course, they're getting their money somewhere else. The question comes up, are they selling it to grain traders? Could grain traders know, broadly speaking, what is coming off the fields, what's going to come off of the fields, what are the prices going to be, and therefore set the prices? Are they selling it to hedge funds? Why wouldn't they? Hedge funds would love to have an absolute up-to-date knowledge of what's growing on the field right now, so they can be playing in the commodity markets with that data, with futures commodities and so forth. Are they selling it to crop insurers? Are they selling it to seed sellers? Are they selling it to food companies? They are biotech firms. The data itself, I think what I'm trying to point to here is, while the model that we're told about digital agriculture is about helping the farmer, the data itself is valuable, and it's not yet clear who that's being shared with, sold to, used by, and to what end. And that's a big question I would raise here. And then you have various kinds of lock-ins. So again, to keep with field view, you can get free field view if you enroll in buyer value. Buyer value is their what's it called? You get money off basically if you buy buyers products. Um, and so you're being connected. The system is being connected with you buying buyer seeds and buyer sprays and so forth. And in fact, buyers going a step further. They're trialing something which they call outcome-based pricing. The idea here is if you have a buyer field view system, they will promise you a certain return. They have all the data on your farm. They'll say, if you use our prescriptions, you will sell your product, your corn or your soybeans at this rate. And if you don't, we'll make up the difference. And if you sell it for more, we will get the difference, or we will get half of the difference. So they see this as, they claim this as sharing the risk with the farmer. But of course, part of this is that the farmer has to actually give them all the data and agree to buy their prescriptions and their products. And this has definitely worried farmers, and it's worried antitrust scholars what this outcome-based pricing could mean. As you see here, there's some quotes from a farmer in Dresden, in fact, saying this is just an economic exercise by big corporations for oligolistic pricing. You know, that they'll use this control not just to push their own products, which of course they'll do, but also to try and set prices. This concern that you see with this quote on the right, this asymmetry of information, where buyer could say, well, we think the price is going to be this, and they could set it deliberately low, knowing that they'll then get half of whatever you do get, and use that to start pushing and playing with prices. One of the problems with this system is you have no insight on how they're deriving their insights, how they're deriving their prescriptions, why they're setting things. Their algorithms are a complete black box. And I think farmers are right to be concerned that a company like Bayer will use this to squeeze and manipulate prices. Obviously, one of the big issues with digital farming, especially as you get towards the automation, is what does it mean for labor? What does it mean for farm work? And when you look at those images of moving robotics into the field, particularly in soft fruit and vegetables and so forth, the obvious question is, what does that mean for those who currently do the picking, for farm workers? And I think this quote here from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers is very good, that in fact, you know, in some ways, the mechanization of labor has been going on for a long time. Labor, farm workers, particularly migrant workers, have been treated as robots for many years, increasingly made to operate as though they were robots. And it's just a pretty small step to replace them entirely with robots, not very groundbreaking. Um, and I think that's a genuine concern. I think, you know, it's realistic, especially in these times because of COVID, where we're seeing that farm workers are seen as an extra cost and a threat, and movement is difficult, and we have more and more walls coming up. The temptation to move to robotic systems where you're not having to house and care for migrant workers must really be there. I actually think part of what we see with robotics, and this isn't just in agriculture, this is generally, is that it's not so much that robotics replace workers, but they augment them. That workers increasingly are expected to use technological devices or even be enhanced. So here you have examples of exoskeletons developed for agricultural workers in Japan to increase their ability to pick things up, to pick things and so forth. And I've heard about similar kind of augmentations with berry workers in Washington state, where pickers are expected to wear automated sort of arms, really, and that's then really affected their health and ruined their back. So there's this sort of merge expectation to become cyborg. And I think there's lots of lessons here from other industries. One of the industries that's been really highly roboticized is warehouses, and particularly this is an Amazon warehouse. Amazon bought this Kiva robotics, and Amazon warehouses are highly roboticized. And in those warehouses, on the one hand, you see that workers are much more controlled. They're often told where to go and how to go. They're sort of directed a little bit as if they are robots through AI systems that tell them where to go on the shop floor. Um, and the you see increased pressure on workers because of the speed with which robots work, that they're expected to produce more and be more efficient as they work with robots. So there's an example here of being expected to process 400 items an hour instead of 100 items an hour because the robot's bringing it to you. You just have to respond to the robot. Um, and of course, the type of work changes when you're working with robots. But I think probably the most interesting findings just recently, there was an investigation, a really good investigative reporting into injuries in Amazon warehouses last year through the injury data that was suppressed by Amazon but managed to leak out. And it found that injury rates in facilities with robots were 50% higher. And those injuries are not just people colliding with robots and the direct type of injuries, but the sort of injuries from repetitive strain and being forced to work harder as you deal with robots. I think all of these are lessons for farm workers as roboticization, and for farmers, frankly, as roboticization moves onto the farm. And particularly for workers, another thing that we've seen with artificial intelligence and big data is particularly worrying, which is that these technologies have biases built into them, particularly racial biases, social biases, gender biases. Um, the A lot of the work right now looking at AI systems critically is seeing how AI is very often racist. The AI systems don't recognize black and brown skin, or they recognize people who are with black and brown skin and stereotype them. That you know, they sort them in ways that are extremely racist. The reason this is happening is because for an AI system, like machine learning is the main AI system, works by taking all the data that it's been given, ingesting it and trying to make sense. And so it's only as equitable as the data it's given. And the data out there is racist, frankly. It repeats, it reproduces and magnifies the injustices and inequalities in our society. And that's becoming very clear as AI gets put in healthcare, as it gets put into legal situations, and it's going to be true as AI determines how the farm works. And so far as the farm system is racist, particularly with migrant workers, and then that will get potentially magnified as the decisions are made by AI. I think one area where we might see a real question over using these technologies is in, for example, organic agriculture. It's very enticing to say we could replace spraying by pesticides with picking by robots, and that also then replaces the high costs of working with migrant labor to do picking or to do weeding. And so, particularly in this time when there's a new focus on touchless agriculture and touchless food systems because of COVID and pandemics, I think the organic movement and agroecology movement, regenerative movement, and so forth may be being very much pushed towards adopting automation to move people out of the system. And particularly, this is true for regenerative agriculture. So what we've noticed as we've looked at the growth of digital agriculture is the regenerative language comes up again and again and again. That there is a claim from digital agriculture companies that they're able to reduce the amount of emissions, e.g. spraying less pesticide or spraying specific pesticides, and so therefore that reduces emissions of fertilizer, or be able to prove sequestration in the soil by sensors and so forth. And that if they can connect that to carbon credit markets, if they can say, by the data coming off, if you farm in this particular way according to our prescriptions using our seeds, then we will be able to show that you've sequestered a certain amount of carbon, and then we'll sell it on carbon credits on your behalf. Bayer has this carbon trading platform that they just launched in the US and Brazil to do this. And this is really where the big money is. The idea that it's not so much the crop coming off of your land, but the carbon credits that you're going to sell into speculative markets. There's many reasons to be concerned about this. Speculative carbon markets have been problematic, but if nothing else, you're shifting the focus of farming away from production of food to production of these intangible speculative assets. And of course, you need to buy into their system in order to get those. Of course, you may say, well, maybe this is a solution to climate change. Maybe this is how we're going to, reduce climate. We do know that regenerative agriculture, is done right, could do that. I think I just want to push back a little on that suggestion.
Excuse me, Jim, I just want to give you a 10-minute heads up.
Great, that's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Before we start looking at these claims that this is going to be a way to reduce, carbon emissions from agriculture by this sort of carefully data-driven precision means, it's worth remembering that data is energy. The way data moves is through electrons. It's the movement of waves through electrons. Every piece of data is energy. And the infrastructure that holds it is also embedded energy. And so all of that has to be brought into the picture if we're going to make any grand climate claims here. For example, this call, the Zoom call, which I think has probably about 60 or 70 people, I'm guessing this will release about 3 kilograms of carbon dioxide itself because of the embedded energy. But that tends to be externalized and not recognized. And we're moving into a world where not just because of agriculture and digitalization in agriculture, but digitalization across everything, we're going to use a tremendous amount of data. By 2025, it's thought there'll be about 175 zettabytes of digital data every year, a trillion gigabytes. I've put this thing here that's a stack of DVDs circling the Earth 222 times. The volume of data that we're moving into as we have the Internet of Things, not just in farming, but in our homes and transport and cities, is immense. And it's thought that just that, overall, about a fifth of global electricity consumption will be taken up by data, amounting to about 14% of global emissions. So data is not a small thing in the consideration of what is going to cause climate change in the next 10, 20 years. In fact, it probably already is. In that picture, where does farm data come? Digital farm data. I would contend it's a very big part of it, potentially, if it scales up in the way that these corporations would like. Farm data is very big data. That's the idea of it. This idea that there are 500,000 data points coming off of a farm every day, or hundreds of thousands coming off of each tractor and so forth. This is my back of the envelope calculation, but if you take the 93 million acres of corn in the US and you say that there's about 7 gigabytes of data coming out of each acre, then that's about 651 petabytes of data coming off of just the US corn, just corn. And when you kind of work out what that is in terms of energy, that's about 3.3 billion kilowatt hours of energy coming off of taking data from the cornfields of America, which I work out is something like about half the energy use of Manitoba. But that's just corn. So let's add soy, let's add cotton, let's add canola. And that's just the extraction and transfer of that data. Then you have to store the data. Then you have to process the data. This is not a small amount of energy, and I think that needs to be in the picture. Sorry, I'm having trouble here with there we go. And particularly because you're using artificial intelligence. So the machine learning artificial intelligence systems that are at the back end of this are also very data hungry. There's been some recent work looking at how training an AI system, just one training session, as you can see here, can be the equivalent. Oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Yeah, can be the equivalent of traveling 700,000 kilometers by car in terms of CO2 emissions. Now, that's a particularly difficult AI system, but it doesn't matter. It gives you a sense of how, once you begin adding AI processing into the equation, and this is continually processing the farm data to give you those prescriptions, that also has to be considered. And on top of that, the storage costs and so forth. So I would just say that. And on top of that, let's think about the embedded energy in building the data infrastructure. I like the example that Benjamin Bratton gives, where he says that the full data infrastructure, he calls it the stack, is the largest accidental megastructure that humanity's ever built. All the wires, the cables, and so forth. That we're laying cables at the moment, data cables, at about 50 times the speed of sound, connected to hundreds of billions of devices. And every time you put one of those devices in, the production of that involves hazardous gases, water, chemicals, of course, power, and hazardous wastes. So, there's a lot of embedded energy in that too.
Jim, that's 5 minutes now.
Okay, thank you. I just want to finish really by stepping back one step further, which is to look at what I call the data colossus, like who ultimately is benefiting from all this data. And it's the large data companies. And when they look at the food system, not just the farm, but the whole food system, they see all kinds of data they can use and take efficiencies from and use as their basis of their business model. So we're seeing new players now in agriculture that we've never seen before. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook are beginning to move into food and agriculture with increasing strength, realizing that this is a tenth of the global economy, and if they can turn it into a data problem, they will become the kings of that food system. I find myself looking a lot at Amazon and thinking that we really need to pay attention to what Amazon are doing. Because we might know the Amazon that has a major stake in grocery, and it's growing at the end, the grocery consumer end, but it also has an increasingly important part in the logistics part of the food chain, and on the farm. All of those data platforms run on cloud computing. The biggest cloud computing company in the world is AWS, Amazon Web Services. AWS controls a third of the global cloud market. It's actually 63% of Amazon's profit. That's where Amazon actually makes its money. Their profits last year were equivalent to the entire revenue of Syngenta, just their profits on their web services. And they are moving very quickly into controlling data and farm data. And I won't go into the details here, but I think that's, they're going to become the major players, much larger than the John Deeres and the Bayer Monsantos. And now that Jeff Bezos has stepped down from Amazon, his focus is food and grocery. So that goes all the way through. And just to one step back further, who owns them? They're owned by, Amazon's owned by these asset management companies, Vanguard, BlackRock, and so forth, who also happen to be the largest owners of Corteva, of Bayer, of John Deere, and of food companies. And you begin to wonder, are they getting the data? How is that driving their strategies? And how are their strategies affecting small farmers, family farmers, and so forth? I want to finish with 3 questions. Do I have time for this, for Kathy? I'll just finish with three questions.
Yep, you've got about 2 minutes.
Great. And then we can go into the conversation. Here's my first question. Existential question. What happens if all this gets hacked or it fails? I'm sure we've all seen recently that there have been days we wake up and Gmail's not working. It's fallen over. Or Skype's not working. They've had a problem with it. What happens when the food system doesn't work one day, for 2 days, or for a week? When the entire food system and production of food and the ability to farm depends upon having continuous data, it becomes strategically important that our food system needs to have continuous data. It's going to fall over, maybe for a day, maybe for a week, or maybe it will be intentionally hacked. There's some really worrying scenarios out there about the internet falling over. I think we shouldn't discount that these days. Should we be tying our food production and food security to data infrastructure? That's my first question. Second is, what happens if it goes wrong? The assumption, of course, is that these prescriptions that are being developed by artificial intelligence will give farmers good information on how to improve their farm. and that they will do it continuously and in a reliable way. But there's a problem with artificial intelligence, which is that we don't exactly know why it makes the decisions it makes. This is called the black box problem of artificial intelligence. That because a machine learning system kind of creates its own algorithms, when you ask it why it decided to make a decision, it can't tell you, and you can't question it. And where this has become really a big issue is in things like self-driving cars. So why did a car turn left when it saw a light? You can't, it won't tell you, you can't tell you. The artificial intelligence system is unexplainable. And there's now a big push to say, how can we make AI become explainable? Because there are mistakes. It doesn't learn correctly all the time. On the left there is a picture, it's a dash cam footage from Tempe, Arizona, when an Uber car, which was being tested by the driver who's on the left, smashed into a 49-year-old woman by the name of Elaine Hertzberg and killed her. She crossed in front of the car, and the car failed to recognize her, and it killed her. She was the first pedestrian killed by a self-driving AI car. Um, why didn't it recognize her? You recognize it. It we don't know. We don't know why it didn't recognize Elaine Hertzberg and why it didn't stop. Something about her just didn't fit its algorithm. And what's absolutely horrendous here is that Uber's been let off. The investigation has said, well, it's not Uber's fault, and it's this other woman, Rafaela Vasquez, transgendered, very poor immigrant, very precarious worker who's now facing the death, even though she was told that she could rely on the system. What this points to is this was one car and one person was tragically killed. What about when it's our food system, when something goes wrong? And the company says, it's not our fault. The farmer should still have been responsible. I think these are really serious questions. And then the last question is, how does this fit with food sovereignty? How does this fit with the things that the NFU and other farm movements have been pushing for decades? And I think that's really the most important question. These are examples of some really good reports. I'd really point to the one by Grain there that's called Digital Control, how big tech moves into food and farming. It just came out last month and it's excellent. And I'll end on, you can get more information from our website at cetragroup.org. Thanks for letting me go a little bit over time. I hope that was not too fast to at least have some good stuff to discuss here. Thank you.